Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the July 30th Special Committee Police and Community Meeting. My name is Councilwoman Ortiz. I represent District 3 and I'm also the chair of this meeting. And I would ask that my colleagues would identify themselves.
Good.
Karen Hiller, District 1.
Mike Padilla, Deputy Mayor, and District 5.
Thank you. First thing, I'll call the meeting to order. Second thing, approval of the minutes from July 29th.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, raise your right hand. 3-0. Thank you. Okay, first thing is a presentation from the Crime Scene Investigation, CSI Topeka.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that right?
That is correct.
All right.
All right.
Can you introduce yourself for us, for the record?
My name is Sergeant James Moore. I'm a second shift supervisor with the Crime Scene Investigations Unit. I've been there since January of last year, right before COVID hit. Currently, we have 3 different shifts working, and I'll get into the specifics of that, but if we could maybe go to the next slide.
Somebody's got to hit that. Got it.
Oh, yeah.
So we can get that off there.
Yep.
Whoever is
Who gets to do that?
running the show.
Whoever's got it.
Oh, hello.
There it is.
Yeah, there you
I did
go.
not know that I had control, but I do now.
She has it. Okay. This is a quote that is kind of driving the spirit of where crime scene's going right now. In 2009, there was a report done by the National Association of Forensic Science. It was commissioned by the President Obama administration that wanted to go through and look at what specifics of forensic science needed to be reformed. This was done mostly in part because when DNA came out, late 80s, early 90s-ish, there was a lot of emphasis placed on forensic evidence, specifically science-based. This led to almost an overabundance of placing the emphasis on how important forensic science was in relation to criminal investigations. They had to go back through, and there are very specific forensic science divisions, specifically impression evidence like bite mark impressions. There were some cases that were made. One of them was, I believe it was the Ted Bundy investigation. He had bit some of his victims. They did some research and found that skin tends to be very plastic, and it moves depending on how things work. So the National Board of Forensic Odontology, which is the people that do the dental impressions when it comes to crime scene work, found out that their science was not accurate. So it came into this term where we started to get what's called junk science. And we started to put a lot of emphasis on prosecutions with this junk science. That led to this, which is our big push for reform. 12 years later, we're still using this report, which is the strengthening forensic science. It's a path forward. So this is what we continuously push to try to drive better investigations through actual science-based information rather than just leading on the, I guess, the importance that the general public puts on science-based evidence. That makes sense. And that came from the Innocence Project, which is very notorious for releasing individuals who've been wrongly convicted on death row. So, next slide. Currently, our CSI unit has 2 supervisors, first and second shift. The third shift crime scene unit is under the direction of the detective supervisor. That was done to try to kind of integrate the use of the third shift units because that tends to be when a lot of our more violent crime happens. And to have that relationship with the crime scene unit and the lead detectives tends to facilitate better investigations. Currently, we have 6 officers that are technicians that are trained to process crime scenes. And we have a 24-hour response Monday through Friday, and we use callback assigned on Saturdays and Sundays. Okay, next slide. The specifics of our unit response. So currently our policy states that crime scene will come if any call that comes out involving a deceased human body. It does not matter the circumstances. There are some exceptions to that, which would be if somebody is in hospice care. They have already been evaluated medically. The doctor has kind of signed off on their end of life situation, and they basically decided that they want to spend the rest of their time at home or in hospice care. So those scenes aren't necessarily investigated by crime scene unit. But if they have an unattended death, which would be anything that's not attended by a physician, that would be something they would call us on. Any offense involving life-threatening injuries, aggravated batteries, hit-and-run vehicle accidents where a pedestrian's involved, those are some examples. Rape where a crime scene's been located. We still have the investigation that proceeds even though a crime scene hasn't been located. A detective would be assigned and still try to process the case file and maybe determine it. A lot of times when it comes to sexual assaults, sometimes drugs are involved, alcohol is involved. We still try to get as much information as we possibly can, even though we can't locate that crime scene for processing, but the investigation still proceeds. If we do have a crime scene, then we would respond and process that accordingly. Fatality accident, once the accident reconstruction supervisors determine that it's time to process the scene for us, we would respond, take photographs, collect any evidence that would need to be collected, specifically like clothing or vehicle parts, maybe laying in the roadway would be something that would be for that. And then there is a outlier on the policy which states that any specialized photography or any collection of evidence that would be beyond the training of a responding officer. The specifics of this would be if you were to respond to a shooting, say in like an apartment complex, we would have to recover those projectiles. The crime scene unit has specific tools that allow us to get into sheetrock, 2x4s, that type of thing to recover the projectile because it has to be done in a specific manner. You can't just pry it out of the wall because the rifling on the projectile is what is important to us to put it into the ballistics for comparisons. So that's not just something you can just dig out of the wall. We would have to be very careful recovering that projectile. And then any other circumstances that a supervisor would think that a crime scene unit would best serve the situation, they would call us and we would respond. So, next slide. This is our current technology and what capabilities we have. We can currently use fingerprint processing. We would either do that with the latent powder application where you would take it and process the fingerprint, or we use what's called cyanoacrylate fuming. It's basically super glue. It's very well known. You take super glue, you heat it up, it adheres to the oils that are left behind, and you get a hardened impression of the fingerprint, and then you can use that to lift, to run through the database. We use DSLR cameras to get evidence specifically for court. We've been using a lot of the in-car cameras that are on the cell phones to collect some of the maybe minor evidence. We get better quality photographs through the crime scene cameras, but they are an expense. So We try to reserve that for maybe the more involved scenes where there's going to be kind of a lengthy duration of processing that. Footwear impression, DNA, obviously, we are currently responsible for the Axon video camera dissemination for court purposes. If a request comes in from the DA's office, we allow them access so that we can get them what they would need for court and for prosecution. Currently, we do all the biohazard evidence, so anything that would have bodily fluids, that would, we would process that. Currently, we do the NIBIN evidence, and I have a specific slide for that here coming up. Tire mark impressions, anything that involves sexual assault or bodily fluid collection and identification. We have 3 officers that have attended bloodstain pattern recognition and documentation class. They're responsible for processing scenes that involve bloodstain patterns, and they would collect those through photographs, submit those to the KBI, and they have an analyst that can use very specific mathematics to come up with what's known as the area of origin and the area of convergence. So it's kind of like a trigonometry, and then through those photographs, they can kind of determine where the attack maybe started and kind of work through the scene that way. We just do a generalized crime scene analysis documentation. We collect, document, preserve all physical evidence that's required of us. We have 2 processing bays that we would use for the vehicle evidence recording. This is a new phenomenon in law enforcement because vehicles are used in a lot of shootings and they tend to get shot up. And we're responsible for going in there and recovering projectiles and showing how these vehicles were at when the shooting may have taken place. We do low light photography and luminol processing. If we believe that there's blood present, we can use luminol to show that in a photograph and then collect that sample. Trajectory and ballistic documentation kind of goes with the vehicle evidence. We put trajectory rods in there and kind of show angles and direction of travel for the flight path of the projectile. And then we work a lot with child abuse cases. The one thing that we do is we have some more serious cases where kids maybe get burned in some bath water. And we have thermometers that are calibrated and tested to make sure that we can get that evidence when we go back to figure out what the temperature of the water was from the water heater, and we can collect that and make sure that that's used in the investigation and possible prosecution. Next slide. Okay, 1997, ATF decided that it is very important for us to start to investigate shootings. We're starting to have a lot of problems with shootings nationwide. They decided to come up with a way for local law enforcement to participate, and that was through this National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. We currently have a NIBIN processing station at the Topeka Police Department. I have all of my technicians are NIBIN certified. They do the entrances into NIBIN. The specifics of it is kind of listed out there, but it's basically a rapid, aggressive means to process this evidence and get it to the investigators as quickly as possible so we can start to disrupt the shooting cycle of these offenders. Crime gun intelligence is paramount into finding out how we can start to get involved in disrupting the shooting cycle. So, and that comes through kind of like what I explained, but that's from the ATF's website, but that's kind of surmised what it is. Next slide. So the slide on the left, that is a entry into NIBINs. There is a ton of information that we can get off of shell casings. We take that, enter it in, Then we start to figure out how we can disrupt the shooting cycle through the crime gun intelligence. Obviously, through the Second Amendment, anybody can purchase a firearm for self-defense or for whatever lawful purpose they mean. But unfortunately, we have this diversion that happens where you get guns that are stolen or lost. You get what's called a straw purchase, where you have somebody else that goes in and buys a gun for somebody that can't because they're federally prohibited. Or you have an illegal sale, which is where you have somebody who has a federal firearms license or an FFL and maybe cooks the books on how they document that, because they're supposed to keep very diligent records. And then that somehow ends up into the shooter's hands. So all of this information with NIBINs is to disrupt the shooting cycle. We want to get that information from those crime scenes, get it entered into NIBINs, get that information if it develops a lead to the lead primary investigator so that we can start to figure out if we have multiple shootings tied to different scenes and maybe one possible suspect, two suspects, however that works. So, next slide. Okay. Currently, we are working to acquire 2 pieces of technology that will help us facilitate better crime scene processing. This piece of equipment on the left, that's what's known as a contactless fingerprint system. And this tablet on the right is a alternate light source. It's kind of hard to see, so we'll just go to the next slide. Okay. So the one on the left, left, contactless fingerprint scanner. What that is that is a camera that is hooked up to the aperture at the front of that is what's known as coaxial lighting. That's a fancy way of saying that the light source on the bottom of that aperture actually shoots up into a mirror, and then it projects out on the same plane as the viewing of the camera. What the light does is it shines on a reflective surface, and then you're able to process fingerprints without application of powder and or any other processes like dyes or stains. So like this slide here in the middle, that's basically a glass door where they've processed it, they've collected that fingerprint. It's now a examination grade latent print that we can send to the KBI and have them placed into APHIS. Cell phones, knife blades, this is obviously the top of a paint can because you can kind of see the lip there. So that basically allows a crime scene technician to process a scene using strictly photographs, and then this reduces not only the workload, but it also gets better quality evidence because now we're looking at examination grade photographs.
So.
Yes.
Excuse me, so you're doing that examination on like a cell phone photo or something?
What it is it takes the surface and it projects that light source onto it, and then the camera then sees the light reflecting off of the oils from the fingerprint, which then allows us to take a photograph. Whereas before, we would have to process it with powder and actually take a lift.
Okay, so that's the print, it's not
Right.
getting that from just a photo?
Exactly.
Okay.
So the other nice application to this is once we collect the photograph, we can therefore have preserved the print. We'll take a swab of it also. So now we have DNA. So this actually is a 2-for-1 for us.
And the reason why that's so important is because we used to have to choose between
Right.
making a fingerprint or getting the DNA. And I think that's the point the sergeant's making is now with this contact with fingerprint system, you can take the fingerprint and then still preserve the DNA evidence and get both.
Yes, thank you, Chief. Was there any other questions on that?
Nope, keep going.
Okay, next slide. In 2017, the state of Kansas has changed the domestic battery statute to now incur what's known as aggravated domestic battery, and that's down here in the red, which is anything that involves strangulation of a victim. These were cases that were coming across first responders' call loads on a daily basis. We had a lot of victims, specifically domestic violence victims, that were involved in an abusive relationship, and the abuser's primary means of control was strangling the victim. We struggled with this. The state stepped in and basically made strangulation of anybody involved in a domestic dispute a felony instead of a misdemeanor, because domestic battery is a misdemeanor. This changes it, makes it a felony. We were kind of struggling to figure out how to collect this evidence, and then we started to do some research and figure out what we needed to do, and we came up with what's known as alternate light source technology. Next slide. So the photograph on the far left is a victim of a domestic violence incident where she's been strangled. You can see photographically there's not much there. There is a mark, but it's nothing that, you know, when an officer shows up to take that photograph, you know, on his work phone or whatever it is, the specifics of that can be argued in court, right? That could easily be kind of maybe referenced by an offender as, you know, she fell down, she hurt herself, whatever it was, these things that tend to come up in these domestic violence investigations. We struggle with as police. We know that these are serious cases. I believe the former district attorney used to call this homicide prevention. This is what we're doing. We're trying to prevent people from getting killed. The ALS over here on the other side shows a much more involved photograph that shows the seriousness of the injury, which you don't get from the regular light source. Simply by taking a different spectrum of light, it penetrates the skin, and you get better quality evidence, which shows this was a pretty significant injury that this person had, as opposed to the primary photograph, which shows very little injury. This is what we're working towards, and that's what the tablet has the capability of doing, is using alternate light source technology to get those photographs. Next slide. This is kind of something we're also pushing towards in interrupting that shooting cycle, the crime gun intelligence. The photograph on the left is a visible light photograph taken by a crime scene technician. You can see the kind of what appears to be a hole right in the middle of the photograph, but a lot of the photograph is taken up by the pattern of the sheet or the pillowcase or whatever it is. When you take that same photograph through an infrared lens, you get the background tends to fall out, and you can still see the white lines, so you know it's the same photograph. But what you get is the hole, and all of that stuff around the hole is what's known as gunshot residue. That gunshot residue can lead to a multitude of investigative leads, specifically when it comes to people we talk to in interview rooms who deny shooting a gun, and we find out that they have gunshot residue on their person, whether it be on their clothing or anything. We can use this infrared photography as kind of presumptive test to challenge the validity of their statement. So that's it for that one. Next slide. I guess that's it. Any questions?
Okay, we will stand for questions. We thank you for that. I do want to say, I had a young man and his father was murdered. I don't remember when. You don't either?
I don't.
And he came forth and said he wanted this in our meeting because it's been
More than 10 years at
I
least.
know it's been over 10 years,
Right.
yes. And I know that the chief talked to him, and he was hoping that with how technology has changed and all of these new things that we have, that, and I think you put him in line with the detective, is that correct?
I did.
So he was hoping that some of this can come forth with some of the things that they had in that investigation to solve his father's case. So I just wanted to mention that. We received an email, and I think people are just thinking we're just pulling things out of the hat, but this was very important to that family. And so I thought it was fitting with the other discussions that we had in presentations. So will that process be available to them if they ask you, like, if you have, I guess one of my questions was, how long do you keep evidence? Will they go back through that young man's father's evidence to see what they have?
Yes. We keep evidence of homicides forever. We don't ever get rid of that evidence in the hopes that a lead will be generated. Over time, people get comfortable, they start to talk, other people become more responsible. We're finding that out now through more prolonged investigations. I have specifically spoken to Pat McLaughlin, used to be a detective, now he's in charge of our cold case squad.
We met him.
Okay, and he's a super great guy, and when he gets a case, he digs in. He has already come down to my desk, and we've already talked about the applications of this for future cold case investigations and what we could do to help push that. And I think that infrared photography would probably be one of the more inclusive applications we could get, because that is evidence that kind of, it doesn't go away. So they use it a lot when they have persons who maybe have expired and their remains have decomposed to the point where they are beyond the point of identification. You can use that infrared camera to actually take photographs of their skin and start to identify any tattoos or anything that they would have.
Really?
Yes.
That's very, very interesting.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a second, I got one more question. I thought I did. Well, that family will be glad to hear that.
Absolutely.
Can you go over your callback? Do you guys just rotate, or how does that work?
Yes, each individual in the unit, including the supervisors, is assigned to the callback rotation, and that's to make sure that we all continue to, I guess, keep our skills as crime scene technicians. We currently have 8 individuals assigned, so it would be an 8-week rotation that you would be assigned callback on, starting Friday night at midnight, or no, I'm sorry, Friday at 07, going into Saturday, because we have a third shift unit that works Friday night. So starting Saturday at 07 is primarily when you would need a callback. If that third shift unit should get overloaded or swamped and need assistance, they would call for a callback person to come assist. So.
And then on some of the newer technology, did you say that we're looking to get it, or we have it? Or we're,
My understanding is that we are simply awaiting delivery.
awesome. Okay, Karen?
Well, a lot of the interest in the last year, especially from the public, is prevention and hoping that these things just don't happen in the first place. How well known, to your knowledge, is this new technology on the street? And is there any advantage to working on making sure that the public is a little more aware of it? I'm just thinking out loud here on the prevention side, or other ways that it's being used for prevention.
I think the major issue that we have, specifically with law enforcement, public entities, government in and of itself, is just misinformation anyway. As I could easily introduce a public relations campaign and get this information out there. Somebody with a specific agenda on a social media platform could then start to kind of chisel away at some of that. I think this technology, and as we progress as a crime scene unit, is actually going to be, I think the crucible will be across the street at the district courthouse.
Well, and it may tell its own story as we
Yes.
use it more, once it turns out that you were able to track down even something 10 years old or whatever.
Yes,
Just-
I think
just
so.
Asking, thinking of what people are.
If I could find a way to combat the misinformation and get this information out there to where people would know that we are working diligently behind the scenes to make sure that these violent crimes are not going to be allowed in Topeka, I would push that train as far as I could, but we are all struggling with how to figure out how to live our lives in this new world with this
Sure.
technology, so.
One more question, if I may. The technology that you talked about regarding gunshots, is that usable in checking a vehicle that we think the shot was fired from? Are you doing that?
Yes, so you can, when a gunshot happens, you get several different things. You get a report, which is the loud noise, and you also get
Casings.
an exhaust of hot gases and, unburnt powder. All of that has to go somewhere. It will either end up on the person or it will end up on the side of the vehicle, inside the vehicle.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, the specifics of it is being able to identify and locate it because it is very minuscule evidence. It's very sensitive evidence. The case law basically says if you suspect you have gunshot residue on a person, the specifics of securing that is not subject to maybe a search warrant because you could easily just wipe it off or you could sweat it off.
So you're allowed to get it right away or not?
We would secure it right away.
Okay.
It's secured and then it's included in the case file. So if you suspect that somebody has that or you suspect that it's there, we're allowed to secure that evidence because it is just so fragile. It will dissipate in a matter of minutes.
So are we using it much yet in drive-bys, suspected
Yes,
vehicles
if we
and
can
shooters?
get that information, the problem is, where do you start looking when you don't have a lens to kind of put where you need to go? This technology will allow us to be able to identify where we need to focus our efforts. I would love to be able to swab the inside and out of every single car. I just don't have the manpower or the resources. So this will help us narrow that search and be more efficient with our current resources.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
That's the kind of thing I think we're all interested in, and again, if it kind of die in water eventually
Mm-hmm.
gets out, then
Yes.
it's as good a way as any, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
If I may.
Yes, Mayor.
I'm going to back up to a couple of things, Sergeant.
Yes, sir.
And the reason I ask this is because, again, this effort has really been to try and really inform the public the extent and the depth of the training that the officers get to do this. Your explanations of what goes on is really interesting and I think very informative, and I appreciate it. I just want to ask, like the technicians like yourself, can you give me an idea of, I guess, the training that goes into any of those officers serving in that capacity, specialized training or certifications or any kind of reinforcement of when people say, well, it's just some guy collecting evidence? Because I can remember back when I first started, there was not as much specific training for technicians, but it has grown, and obviously your report tells us that it has. Can you kind of give us an idea what you go through to apply for the job, what you go through to improve your skills on the job?
So when I applied or became interested in it, I was in the process of acquiring my master's degree in forensic science from Oklahoma State and have since graduated. I was a 2020 COVID graduate, so I got to celebrate in my house.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The specifics of the training are directed primarily on those disciplines and those skill sets that are key to those. The number one being photography. Photography in and of itself is one skill set that if you don't fine tune, work with, the third shift guys are notorious for just going out and taking photographs in low light. I have one third shift guy that he should probably be a professional photographer. His crime scene photos are phenomenal. And then we start to build on those other ones, like the blood stain, the blood pattern recognition. That involves an innate or a huge amount of training in regards to just the mathematics. Trigonometry is not one of my fortes, but I have some super smart guys that picked that up and ran with it, and now we have those people that are trained, and they go to these scenes that involve these horrible, brutal crimes, but we can really start to put the evidence together to facilitate some leads for the detectives, which is why we're here. But the training in and of itself is it's all over the board. I mean, we have 2-week classes, 1-week classes. Several have, there's a class that just involves just shooting reconstruction. So if you were to get 2 cars that were shooting at each other for 3 miles down the road, you could go back and reconstruct that scene with lasers. And you could use that photography as your case to show how the trajectory went. And there's a multitude of training, and it is incredibly in-depth, and a lot of it had to be put on the back burner because of the pandemic restrictions. We had some NIBIN training that was set up for them to go down to Anniston. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions through the pandemic, we had to pull everybody's travel. And so we were able to facilitate that through some online training. So we're trying to adapt and be.
Well, I appreciate that, Sergeant. I just really want the public to understand the degree of expertise that goes into this kind of work, because I think it goes to the confidence level that the city has on its officers, that they can feel confident that they're really getting intelligent, trained officers doing this kind of work. And, you know, when you're talking about recruiting, you can talk to a kid and say, well, you can be a forensic scientist and a police officer at the same time. I don't think people put those in the same sentence very often, but I just think I want people to know the level of training that we have on this department. So I appreciate that. And if I could follow up with another question, Madam?
Yes, you may.
On the NIBIN and the ballistics, I understand what you were saying about being able to swab every car or whatever. So when there is a shooting, say a random shooting, called to the scene, maybe nothing is there, but maybe some cartridges. Do you collect those and from there build a database that you're able to maintain? So let's say if it's unfortunate enough that one of those random shootings should occur in another part of town and someone is injured, that evidence compared to other evidence that you might have been able to collect could be compared to see if this one person, and I think you kind of mentioned that,
Yes.
is involved in multiple incidents within the city, because I think that's something we're all concerned about, these shootings at night that we hear. I heard one just last week, and it was a random exchange back and forth, like a running battle going. I know that by the time officers are alerted to that, nobody's going to be there, but there could be some physical evidence to collect. Is that a matter of procedure that you would respond in the area and see if you could find some evidence that could be collected and put in the database?
Yes, so there's a lot to unpack there, but as
Yeah.
far as the database goes, we decided to get more in line with our federal partners as they have a little bit more resources. So the database is actually maintained by the ATF.
Okay,
We investigate the local shootings and place all of that evidence into the NIBIN's database to try to generate leads. And what that does is, instead of having it stretched out over months, it breaks it down into days, so that we can have more of an impact on the local crime, gun violence, so that we can generate those leads faster and start to figure out who's participating in what violent activities or which guns are associated with these. Then we drive the train with the field ops as they go out and they conduct their day-to-day mission, and they seize a gun in a car stop. That gun is test fired. Well, that test fire casing comes back and figures out that it was now linked or tied to 3 or 4 different shootings. Now we have a lead for a detective to follow to go in and speak with this individual and say, why do you have a gun that's tied to several shootings? Or, you know, we can go back and maybe pull video and see if the car that he was driving in the car stop was seen in the videos that this other car was seen driving around town. So there's a multitude of things that an investigator can use with that crime gun intelligence just to generate leads and start to really focus the efforts on these violent offenders.
I appreciate that explanation. I think it's, again, encouraging and reassuring that that's possible, because I think that's important for the investigative follow-up, and that the citizens do know that officers are using every tool they have.
And then some we don't have.
Yeah, and that was the other thing, I think Councilwoman Hiller mentioned it, that the contactless fingerprint system, you're just waiting on delivery, pretty much?
Yes, we were working that over the course of several months. It was approved, and I believe through the vendor that we use, they have to get the materials, they have to test it so that it can be, you know, basically certified before it's used in court. So that in and of itself is a huge lengthy process. A lot of the science is basically what's known as peer review. So if I take a fingerprint, I say person X is involved in this and I think it's them, they have to then send that fingerprint off into another database for somebody to look at it and peer review it. And if they come up with the same conclusion, then that is what's determined as a correlation or a match. We don't use the word match, but we have to have that process so that we can have the checks and balances on our discipline and skill set to maintain the trust that we need through the science. So,
Well, thank you again, Sergeant, I appreciate it.
yes, sir.
Thank you, Matt.
I have another question. With this advance in the technology and the ability to draw information out of an object, has that, and I don't know if this question's really for you or somebody else, has that changed the department's response time and reaction when a citizen calls and says, guess what, I just found X, a gun, an object in my yard or in the alley? Has that changed the?
I don't think so. It's changed our response time in regards to going out and collecting it, but it has absolutely 100% changed what we can do with it when we get it. And I think that's the important part of it. It's exactly what he's talking about. I mean, this NIBIN part of collecting shell casings from scenes all across timeframes, all across the city, entering that into a database and then getting correlations that match back to possible source guns or possible people involved in a much more compressed timeline for our investigators is incredibly invaluable, because that clock is ticking from the minute that the crime occurs. And the longer you go, the harder it is to put those pieces together. So that time frame of us having a NIBIN system here and having our trained technicians to do those shell casing entries and gun test fire entries here locally, all of those things shorten the time frame, which gives us a much better chance and a much better response to how we do crime gun situations across the board, but especially this. But you know, it's a great representation here, because Sergeant Moore's a humble guy. He didn't even tell you the rest of his qualifications, which would take a long time, because he's a member of our bomb squad, which means he's had a ton of technical training in regards to electronics. So I appreciate the opportunity to showcase him, because the crime scene unit here at the police department is a great asset. The equipment that they have, the partnerships we have with the federals, and I think you guys can see the commitment that we have to get cutting edge technology equipment here in Topeka, Kansas, because it improves our abilities to respond and also prosecute and investigate crimes down the road. So that is why the investigative backgrounds that we have in the leadership roles are so important, because we are willing to move towards the equipment. We have the experts in the fields, in the positions that they need to be at our agency to make us efficient, and we listen to them. And when we get new equipment and we get opportunities, we work through the managerial side and we put the funds where we need to and try to get those things approved. And we like being the test cases for new equipment and rolling them out here in the Shawnee County District Court for prosecution. So it's a great opportunity for us to showcase all of those things. But that NIBIN thing is one of the big pieces that we have here in Topeka. And all it does is shorten the time frame for information that we used to get. But that makes all the difference in the world.
Well, I asked because I think everybody knows you do this great job, but maybe not as much as in the detail. But I
Sure.
remember some years ago now, finding a gun in our front yard on Lane Street. And there's a fence right there. So it was pretty clear somebody threw it out of a vehicle and it dropped in the yard. There was a bullet in the chamber and it was cocked. But there was no one there. It was the morning after somebody shot up that restaurant on 29th Street. It's been some years ago. Anyway, and they said, well, if somebody was standing there pointing it at you, we'd be right over.
Yeah.
But the fact that it was laying in the grass, and others have had those sorts of experiences, and that's why I asked, because I would think that whether it had been a major headline, that was a front page deal, but
Right.
no matter what it had been used for, if there was a chance to get that evidence, it took 4 hours. And I would think you'd hurry up and get it sooner. And that confidence on the part of the citizens
Yeah.
that, wow, if I let them know, this is evidence they know what to do with it, they could do something with it, makes a difference.
It's hard to speak to historical
I know.
responses, but I can tell you that there was frustration from an investigator standpoint to submit evidence and have it be a year or more before we got it back.
Understood.
To tell us. And so that's why the timeliness part of
Well, that's
NIBIN.
why I asked.
I mean, because as James showed you, NIBIN's been around since 1997, but the way we do NIBIN in 2021 is completely different, and I can speak a lot to it because it was a frustrating part for a number of years, because a year later, giving me as an investigator a linkage to a source gun on a shooting, there's a lot of moving people that could have been involved with that gun in the last year.
Exactly.
But in a week or in a few days, it's a lot easier to put those things together. So I would tell you, NIBIN's been a program, but the 2021 version is a lot more helpful to local police departments. And I think it's really a big help to us with our partners with the federals too.
Well, and thank you. That's why I asked the question.
Yes. The one thing we have a lot of is history. So, and I think the culture change is what's really pushing it. My father was a police officer down here for many years. I have heard all of the stories, but we really emphasize, and you'll see that with the FTO program when it comes up here, is how we are really making sure that these new police officers understand how important it is that you respond to these calls in a timely manner and be professional and collect that evidence, because you never know, it could solve your friend's homicide. I mean, it's just that critical.
Well, and I know that, there's a lot of people that say we're not solving crimes, we're not doing enough to do that. And so I always encourage them to try to go back and try to think about things, try to talk to people. And I've talked to our chief about cold cases and trying to bring them back to the forefront, to jog people's memory, but to keep them alive, but to also let the families know that we haven't forgot them. We haven't, it's been years, but we haven't forgot them, and we've just got to do a better job at that.
Yes,
Because
I absolutely agree.
they think we're not doing anything. We have all this technology, but we're not doing anything, or we don't care. And that does not sound,
I think the issue is we're starting to round the corner, but law enforcement, it's our daily dozen. We go in and there was a shooting last night, and there was a shooting the night before, there was a homicide. They don't understand the correlation between this is somebody's loved one. This is the worst day of their life, was the day that person was taken
Right.
from them. And that's very important to them, that they get a sense of justice for them, because these are our citizens. These are people who live here who didn't deserve this. So,
absolutely. One thing, and then I will be through. You mentioned shooting is a problem nationwide, in your thing. So what are we doing about it if it's a problem nationwide? Are we looking for different technology to solve it? Are we,
There's
we
some different
communicating?
technology out there, communicating with federal partners. There is, some of the larger metropolitan areas actually use what's known as an acoustical shot locator. They have it up on some of their high-rise buildings so that when they, again, through trigonometry, as the sound bounces off of different buildings, you're able to kind of locate a known origin, which allows officers to get that information real time in their cruisers to where they could respond to those. Hey, I got a notification from, the shot acoustic device that says it's 6th and Jackson. But these are ridiculously expensive platforms, and that's why they're mostly centralized in Chicago, St. Louis, where they have a ridiculous amount of crime violence, or gun violence, sorry.
Right.
We are constantly trying to evaluate technology and figure out where we're at. Is this something that's feasible? Because we are stewards of the resources of the city. We have to be good stewards of money management. So we need to make sure that this is something that we just don't go frivolously waste money on that sits somewhere and never gets used. So that's an evaluation part of it. The evaluation part of it too is, will this generate the leads that we need to close some cases? Because that's ultimately what we want to do is to get those cases that are closed and we get an arrest on an offender, we've got to get those up so that we can start to build that trust back with the community so that they understand we're out here working every day so we can close these cases for you guys.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Just one more.
Okay.
Are you Jimmy Moore's son?
Yes,
Well, Jimmy Moore was a good guy. I mean, I really
everybody tells me.
liked him, worked with him for many years. I see it a little bit in your face, but you're a lot bigger than Jimmy was.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you for choosing to stay and keep the name of the police department. I appreciate your
you.
presentation and your
Yes, sir.
service.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else? Chief? Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we'll have Field Training Officer FTO program. Who's doing, Mr. Salamanca?
This is kind of going to be a tag team approach.
Okay.
You want to use that other one, or do you want to?
Yeah, I probably can. I probably need to take this and we can screen mirror just a couple of parts of the program that we want to give you guys kind of some direct exposure to.
Now, I had 3 bullet points: required, mandates, training and development. I don't care how you wanna hit it.
Okay.
So I'll start, and then as the newly appointed training director, Lieutenant Cross, who took over for Lieutenant Simmons, whose departure devastated Sylvia, so.
Sure did. Sorry to say
I
it.
probably can't keep up, but that's why Sergeant Salamanca is here. He's actually our assistant training director and directly oversees the field training program. But we will give you kind of a background, and then he can help me muddle through any questions that I don't know the answers to, though those usually aren't many. So if you want to go ahead and pull up that slide, and next slide, please. So the Kansas Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training is the 12-member body appointed by the governor that oversees law enforcement training for the entire state of Kansas. They develop our core competencies, our basic curriculum, and grant certification to all officers throughout the state. So they are the ones that basically say what the minimum standards are, to your first point. As part of Kansas CPOS, there is no mandated field training program for agencies within the state of Kansas. Next slide. The basic academy, as outlined by Kansas CPOS, is 560 hours, which equates to about 14 weeks of training. This would be kind of your bachelor's degree program, like what the minimum would be to be a certified law enforcement officer. The TPD training program spans the entire 18-month probation for our officers from the time they're hired until their 18-month probationary period is over, and it's broken down into 3 phases. The first phase is the Recruit Academy, which is currently a 6-month academy. And then the second phase is that field training phase, which is 5 months. Within that 5-month time frame for the academy, it is broken down into 4 phases within that time frame. So what happens is the first 6 weeks is phase 1. They're assigned to their initial field training officer. Phase 2 is another 6 weeks with a different training officer. We generally try to do this broken up over shifts and incorporate all areas of town so that our training is not relegated to, say, one zone or the west side or the east side or North Topeka or any of those things. We try to expose our officers to the entire city during those 3 phases. So the first 3 phases, they switch FTOs, and those are 6 weeks apiece. It also provides an opportunity for different personalities to interact and different observation of their skill sets. So I would liken our basic training academy to you going and getting your degree, and then our field training program is like your residency, right? So now you're gonna go do on-the-job training under the direct supervision of someone who has done what you've done and is evaluating your skill set. New in our last FTO phase, this has been revamped since 2020. And I think that that's what's really important, is to capitalize on the changes that we've recently made and the results that we're already seeing immediately. But that 4th phase is a 2-week period where the recruit officer returns back to their first FTO. And the value in this is that you have the same person seeing them from where they started to where they ended. And you should see tremendous growth, right?
Which is the 4th phase?
4th phase is the 2 weeks where the officer returns to their initial recruit officer,
okay.
or to their initial FTO. So I'm assigned to the first one, I go to a second one, I go to a different part of town, a different shift, I go to a third one, and I finally come back to where I started. So they have met me at my newest, greenest, first day on the street where I'm nervous to I should be able to be like, I got this, let's go. And that is new. So, and then phase 3 is the solo evaluation, where once they have completed those 20 weeks of supervised FTO timeframe, they're released on their own. They're still in the probationary role, so they can be released if they can't cut the mustard. If having that partner and that supervision and that constant feedback doesn't allow them to function on their own, this is where we're gonna find that out. Because it's quite possible that I can do something with you there to hold my hand, but then when I'm on my own, it may not translate. What we have is a 7-month window to determine if it's a matter of remedial training or if more training is necessary, or if this is someone who's not going to be able to do that. And in that final phase, they're actually evaluated directly by their assigned supervisors in the Field Operations Bureau. During this FTO phase, I think it's the next slide. Okay, so during the field training phase, we do a daily observation report. So this is what I want to talk about specific to recent changes. Previously, the department strictly operated under what's called the San Jose model, and we've now moved towards a more Reno model, and what we actually use is a combination of the two. To simplify it, the San Jose model is based on scoring, grades, right? ABCD. It's a competency base, it follows an FTO book, and it's checking the boxes. Did you do this? Can you do this? Did you do this well? And there are ratings of 1, 2, and 3 for these skill sets, 4, 5, and 6 for these skill sets. These pass, these don't. Okay, so it's very black and white, very scored, like you would with grades per se. Whereas the Reno model is based more on problem-based learning. So it is more an evaluation of their ability to critically think, right? Not can I work an alarm call from start to finish, but when I arrive at an alarm call, can I assess whether or not I can make entry into this place? What are the circumstances surrounding this? Is it storming outside and weather is creating 611 alarm calls? Or did I show up and the window's broken and items that appear to have been stolen from the house are drawn across the lawn? Those are very different alarm calls, right? So just because I can show up to that first alarm call within my San Jose book and says, can the recruit officer work an alarm call? Yep, we did it, and yep, they're proficient. But now I'm at the alarm call where the circumstances are completely different, and how am I evaluating my ability to critically think through the differences in that? So that's the benefit of the Reno model. What that has added are what we call daily observation reports. This was, I believe, Ruben will attest to the fact, met with some pushback from the FTOs because of the amount of time it takes to document what they're doing every day. That has been quieted by seeing the return on investment of what that time gets us, right? So the recruit rides with the FTO, and the FTO is basically keeping a daily narrative of what they did and what the recruit did well and what they didn't do every single day. That's what I can screen mirror for you. briefly to show you what that looks like, if and I can figure out how to do that. This is what it looks like. So every single day at the end of their shift, the FTO is required to fill this out, and this saves to our database where training can look at these records, the supervisors and FOB can look at these records, and this is an early intervention system. This is what's missing under the old model of the San Jose model that we were doing just one class load ago. Because we're checking yes or no, and there's no timeline on whether you have to check yes or no. By the end of your training phase, you have to be yes on all. This allows us to establish early intervention points based not just on can they work an alarm call, but we came to this alarm call and they either did a really good job of critically thinking or I had to hold their hand the whole way, and how they develop. I believe that this change to this modified blending of this San Jose, you still have to be able to grade, right? Either you can do it or you can't. But this daily feedback and ability, Sergeant Salamanca reads these consistently, has allowed us this time to get to our third FTO phase with this particular recruit class with not one person identifying issues, because they were either identified early and retrained or some sort of intervention was done. And so FTO phase, they're more confident, the officers are more ready to go. And so that's the benefit in that. Now I have to figure out how to stop sharing. Can I go back to my PowerPoint, please? Okay. So those daily observation reports are part of the new thing. Weekly, they're evaluated on 16 core competencies. And I have the list of those that I can read. Preparedness, attitude towards the law enforcement work, their command presence and conflict resolutions, policies and procedures, law, orientation, basically can you find your way around the city, right? Normal driving, high stress driving, report writing, non-stress decision making, and stress decision making, which are very different, interview and interrogation, self-initiated activity, officer safety, accident investigations, radio usage, and then most importantly, relationship and ethics. So they do these daily observation reports, and then weekly they go and apply their daily observations to how they respond to those 16 core competencies and fill out a weekly report. So we're doing daily, we're doing weekly, okay? Let's see. The FTO task book, go ahead.
One of the
Oh,
things.
hold on.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You can't tell her that. This is my meeting.
You're right.
You ready?
Yeah.
One of the things that's been very important in the engagements and the discussion over 2020 that caused us to have this was to be sure that our officers were good at de-escalation and customer service. I did not hear those two. I heard command of the situation, but not the other two in that list.
Yeah, so those fall under almost everything. So command, presence, preparedness, relationship, and ethics. So under relationship with ethics, they're broken down into further categories. So like subcategories, relationships, how you relate to the public, your communication styles, adapting your communication style to the person. So essentially one of the things that you would evaluate is if I show up at a situation and you're screaming and yelling at me, I may very well need to raise my voice in order to be heard over you, but then as you back down, I also have to back down. So I'm not escalating to screaming and maintaining screaming. My behavior is dictated by your response and how we interact with each other, so that falls under our relationship and ethics category, and they're broken down even further. So it's evaluating their interactions with the public, with other officers, all of that is encompassed into that. They're also outlined within the FTO task book, which we also can pull up. It is exceptionally long, but it goes back to no subjectivity and less of a narrative and more of a scoring. Either you can do this or you can't, and each score has got directions to the field training officer about what you're looking for. So language, volume, those are all outlined in the San Jose, which is part of the reason we have opted to go with a modified, because that San Jose model spells out exactly what you're supposed to be looking for, while the daily observation covers the gray area that is 90% of police work, right? The ability to kind of adapt instead of go, it's either this or this, because that's where we operate.
I think I'd like to see it just because it's so important, and And when the highlight is just command of the situation, I hear you. We just knew that that was a real subject that we wanted to be addressing in this
So-
process.
I gotta figure out how to share my screen again, hold on. Okay, this will stop others. Yes, I do. So for example, this is one of 32 competencies covered in that FTO task manual that is part of our evaluation process. So this one would be command presence specifically, calm confidence, and organized approach. And so what it shows the FTO are the scores. These are unacceptable. Acts timidly or speaks in a manner that is ineffective or emotionally charged, angry, cocky, or lacking. If they're acceptable, deals with suspects or victims, they act in control of the situation, scanning for adversaries, communicates commands in a clear and concise manner. And then superior, exudes confidence, is in control, treats victims, suspects with respect and dignity without compromising safety. So this is how specific we are, and this is why I said we've gone with a modified approach, because the subjectivity of that Reno model that's a daily evaluation is not as specific as this, so that they know what they're looking for. So that combined approach checks all the boxes.
So that's the standard. It's just a different way of,
Correct.
okay.
So this is all encompassed in command presence. So for the daily and weekly, for the Reno side of things, there's 16, but that task book has 32, and they're all spelled out this way. I pulled up command presence because I anticipated this would be one of the things, but it's very specific. This is what I'm looking for. If I would have called you cocky, you're a 1-2, that's unacceptable. And it tells the recruit officer and the FTO both. These are the things that are being looked at, and this is what behavior is acceptable, this is what's not.
If I can ask another question.
Yes, you may.
Have those same standards and elements of feedback migrated up into the ranks of the officers as well?
You'll have to clarify what you mean. So,
Well, you're talking about training,
sure.
and if this is a change in how we have identified a
I got what you're
standard
saying.
and,
So that San Jose model and that FTO task book is historically what we have operated out of. So that has always been the standard and what the evaluation tool was. What we have been lacking is the narrative model to allow for the everyday, day-to-day gray area that I'm not putting a number on this, but I'm trying to identify, is this a personality flaw? Is this a character flaw? Is this something that's trainable, or is this the person you are and you need to get out? And so that's the change. We've always used that San Jose model. It's somewhat outdated because it is just a score system. And like I said, I can go to one alarm call and I can get 6s across the board. I can go to the next alarm call and get 3s because the circumstances are different and I don't know how to react. So the Reno implementation allows us to evaluate both. And I'm not checking a box here, I'm looking at what you're doing daily.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Oh, Chief- Chief had a-
Okay, I'll give, Karen, are you done?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, not unless they're done.
No, are you done with your question?
Yes. yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
Chief?
I think I just wanted to answer Councilwoman Hiller's question, or my perspective of what it is. It very much is the expectation for the entire agency to be respectful, confident in our dealings, but to be professional and articulate. So those standards that are reflected in the training program are definitely the expectations that we have from the top to the bottom.
And if I can, with what she said about the change and how they're handling the recruits and the training classes, has there been a change in how it's been managed at higher levels?
I believe that to some degree, the changes that have been made have been more in the formalization and the documentation of the
Yes.
training program to take out,
Okay.
as she suggested, to take out some of the subjectivity. Now, up the chain of command, we don't have daily and weekly documented evaluations, obviously, but I believe the gist of the issues that you're speaking to have always been the expectations, and we continue to work on those. And I think you've had a number of things committed or brought forth to this committee that would speak to the advancements that we've done in regards to customer service and professionalism.
If I may, I think we have, one of the things I've said all along is you can train people all you want. What is the performance? Are we measuring that performance? And so that.
I always take that
question.
on me as the head of the agency to put forth what the standard is and to clearly define what the expectations are. And I know this committee's heard me say on a number of occasions, I can assure you that my staff knows what my expectations are, but I try to walk the walk along with the talk on that by doing it myself as well.
Understood. That's important. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Jennifer, and I apologize, I've grown up with this young lady, so it's kind of hard for me to address her. Can you get the committee a copy of that page 18 that you were just,
Are you talking about, you can have access to the entire FTO book barring any, it's a 30, I mean, it's a massive, like I just pulled up that one. I have it in a PDF that can be absolutely sent to the committee.
Sure.
Yeah, we can do that before we leave.
was it 133 pages? I thought it was like 100 and something, that's why I said I'll just take the page.
It's 133, but that 133 encompasses all 32 of those standards and each scoring rubric for those.
That's
within
fine,
that.
just send it to Liz.
Okay,
Mike?
I can do that.
Send it to Mike, he doesn't have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The one thing, it's maybe an observation, but a question at the same time. I like the explanation of the difference between the San Jose and the Reno. Because I think, and I think the chief and I, we've kind of talked about this. You know, there are a lot of mechanics, I guess, at being a police officer. Things that you can say, like I said, check a box, check a box, check a box. But in between those boxes,
Great,
there's a whole lot of gray.
absolutely.
And I think if this model is embraced and really put into place with an acceptance that I trust the chief has done a good job in, I think that starts to shake out the people who can put on a good show, but if you give them the opportunity, they're going to slip and cause the agency or someone problems. And that's the thing that I think this training regimen is supposed to be, is to, when we finish, we've got a good officer who not only can just do all the check marks, but in between has the character and personality that will be a good officer for a career, I hope.
Yes.
Is that kind of the focus or the direction why you went to this?
I can answer that. One of the evolutions of training we've done is, in times past, like for example, when I went to the FTO program 20 years ago, it was an officer that was selected who had a good track record, had good evaluations, but the officer may or may not have any instructor development training. So when we started re-examining how we facilitate the program, we started looking at our officers who were very good officers, but they didn't have any training on how to actually teach. So with the Reno model, what that brought was a connectivity and a rapport building. And what it does is it also identifies adult learning theory. So now we're able to tap in to, I say new generation because I'm older now, but we have to find different ways to teach because people respond differently to different situations. So we're very proud of the training. As the lieutenant stated a number of times, this has been, knock on wood, one of the quietest training periods we've had because we're able to identify early detection has been has saved us because of staffing. The goal is to get these officers on the street, but to be safe, to be smart, to be competent, to be able to communicate, to be able to de-escalate. And those boxes are not only being checked, but the narratives are there to justify everything that the recruit does in his performance or her performance every day is being measured. And either they're there or they're not, but when they're not, by the time, like right now, we have phase 3 is ending in 2 weeks. So as soon as everybody is going to go to phase 4. Phase 4 should be just verifying that they're ready to go to a solo status. So we're very confident by the end of the month that we're going to give field operations 11 solo officers, which is a good thing because we need it. And so we're very proud of that piece because the field training officers in times past, they didn't know what they didn't know. They weren't natural teachers or trainers. They led by example, but they didn't really know how to actually sit down and formulate a curriculum or some of the things necessary in that skill set to teach. And that's where this has grown. So.
Thank you, sir.
Definitely. And I think it's important to point out, like we were asked to come and present on the field training officer program, but these changes aren't just affecting our training officer program. These are implemented throughout our training processes. So it's our intent to use these same models, these same evaluation processes, and these same teaching methods with our in-service, with our seasoned officers, which speaks to your point, Councilwoman. Yes, we are changing the culture of how we deliver training. I watched Sergeant Salamanca and Sergeant Campos deliver this specific type of training to our current recruit class on Friday and was astounded. And I told them the discomfort you feel in moving through this scenario right now That is what I felt my first 5 calls on the street. The first day that I hit the street, I felt that. And you feel that in a controlled environment in the classroom. I got in the car and hit the emergency button on my radio because I was so out of my head that I was like hitting buttons like, wait, what am I supposed to do? And they're like, unit whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's me. And they're like, are you okay? Yes, I am. But that speaks to the evolution of training over 17, 18 years. These recruits are feeling that in a controlled environment in a classroom with someone there to tell them, stop, why are you doing what you're doing? We can increase the quantity of training until the cows come home. You know, we can give doctorates, we can give master's degrees, but I know plenty of people with master's degrees and doctorates who can't critically think and who can't make a decision in the moment. I could care less if we do 600 years of training in a recruit academy class. If you cannot apply it to the job, you don't belong here. And what our changes in our FTO program as well as our in-service training are hoping to accomplish is to evaluate whether these people can critically think, whether they can speak to why they're doing what they're doing, right? We as law enforcement officers are trained when someone questions what we're doing, it's a threat to our safety. That's exceptionally real. Most people do what the police tell them to do because they say do it. That's reality. So anybody who doesn't has to give you an immediate red flag as to why. But the minute you've established that it's not a safety concern, we can't get offended about being asked to explain ourselves. If we can't explain ourselves, then we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. That's right. And what happens is you can deliver case law all day long, but there's not one set of Supreme Court case law where the facts are the same. That's why it made it to the Supreme Court. So it's one caveat within that changed the entire outcome. And I can't teach that over 611 years, right? And I certainly can't pull it out of my handbasket in a split-second decision on the street. So I have to understand basic core competencies, but I have to be able to apply them. And that's what this is measuring, more so than we ever have in the past. So, can I have my PowerPoint back? The other thing that is new are the self-evaluations completed by the recruit officer. So they're asked to evaluate their self. And these go into that same database. They're accessible to training staff, they're accessible to commanders, they're accessible to their supervisors. Why is this a valuable tool? Because if my FTO is telling me I have all these problems and I think I'm everybody's gift to the streets, we have a disconnect, right? If I have an FTO who has not made me aware of my weaknesses, my FTO is failing me. There should be no surprises. And to your point again, one of the conversations I had with each of the sergeants in the training staff when I came over is that my most important expectation as your commander is that you know your strengths and weaknesses. Because if you can't acknowledge your weaknesses, you're never gonna fix them. And if you don't know who the strengths are around you, you can't fill in the gaps where you're lacking, right? And so these self-evaluations are also early detection that either our FTOs need to be weeded out at Chief Wheelis's level or that there's a disconnect in communication. And so those are exceptionally important. The bi-weekly meetings between the recruit, the training officer, and their field training supervisor happen bi-weekly so that that early detection is hit. So that if something in the narrative was misinterpreted by the supervisor, it's a face-to-face time for the 3 of them to talk it out and make sure they're all on the same page, right? We know that written communication sometimes loses what's here when we're face-to-face. We've all learned that over Zoom, right? And so it's very important to have that bi-weekly check-in to make sure we're all still on the same page.
If I could add one caveat to that. An important note, an additional layer to the FTO program is the field training supervisor. So the field training supervisor, unlike the field training officer, maintains that supervision throughout the 5 months. So that person does not change. And the reason for that is if, as in human nature, there's a lack of chemistry, something develops within the recruit and the training officer, we need to identify that as well, because that could hinder and become a block to the training, a filter, if you will. So the field training supervisor, his or her role is to make sure that they maintain that relationship, that rapport, that communication, just in the event there's some personal issues going on, or maybe it's just not a good environment conducive to learning. And so the field training supervisor will contact training, we'll sit down and have a discussion, and it's not delivered as a punishment, but sometimes we may move that recruit officer to another field training officer just so that he or she, we always tell the instructors, it's not about them, it's about the recruit. So the big piece here with the instructor development is to remove their ego. That was a big thing that we were dealing with for a number of years without realizing it. Trying to compare a new officer to someone like me or someone that's been tenured, and you just can't do that. So I think that's an important piece I want to talk about. They're known as FTSs, which is Field Training Supervisor. So we have several layers that monitor this program.
And they don't supervise the performance of the FTO. They supervise the performance of the recruit as it relates to the performance of the FTO. Does that make sense? So that supervisor is attached to that recruit through the entire process. The other part of that is not on the slide, but that they also do is that in each phase, the recruit officer evaluates their FTO on a very specific set of questions. And some of those questions include like, was there anything this FTO taught you that was inconsistent with your training? That helps us identify, have we gapped? Have we missed something? Because law enforcement adapts, right? Like our building searches, they change. Active shooter response changes. What we're doing changes. We've implemented FTO training where they come in, and what we've also done is during recruit week, rather than having that implemented by our tactical team the entire time, the training department facilitates that with the FTOs in attendance to help facilitate that instead of SWAT guys, so that they are observing what their recruits are being taught, and any differences can be mashed out there before they hit the street. So there's multiple layers that haven't existed previously that currently exist. Sergeant Salamanca reads all of those and provides individual feedback. This was my first time to get them in a phase. Some of them are quite candid and funny. The funniest one was my FTO taps on the car too much when I'm doing my report. So we told him like, dude, stop, that's distracting. And you'll get certain things like, this FTO doesn't allow me, I felt in control of this call and he kept taking over for me. So that's relevant feedback for our training director and assistant director to come in and say, you have to allow them to do this unless they're floundering. If there's not an issue, just because it's not your way doesn't mean it's the wrong way. And unless there's a safety issue, you gotta let them, right? And so those are kind of the parts of our field training phase. The final step is an FTS board. Right now, what that has looked like is the 2 FOB captains and the field training supervisors who come in. We are also looking at some changes the training staff has been discussing. Can we do this on a problem-based learning where we provide the simple scenario not designed to trick them, but have them give a presentation, i.e. to be able to answer for almost like a verbal narrative report so that we're gauging their ability to answer for their actions, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? And so then at that phase, it's determined, yes, they're gonna move to this solo phase, which is still under the probationary and still considered part of their training. Just because they're not with an FTO doesn't mean they're free to go. But are they ready to fly solo and be evaluated in that next phase, or do they need remedial training? Do they need specific attention in some specific skills? Do they need to be reassigned? Do they need to be retrained? And then they go to the solo phase. The solo phase is then evaluated at the FOB level in patrol. So they meet monthly with the supervisors to establish, next slide. That slide is missing from this one. They meet monthly with the field training supervisors. This was new information I had to get in a meeting with Captain Stewart, and so it didn't make it to Taylor, but I can send you the updated presentation. Basically, they evaluate them on specific competencies within that, to include report writing, officer safety, decision-making, time management, their positive attributes, their disciplinary issues, errors requiring additional training, and then constructive input on retention decisions. Are they ready to fly solo? Are they ready to be off probation? Do they need to go, right? So they're still working within those core competencies of that FTO training book and evaluate those, but these are the specific ones they continue to evaluate monthly in writing in a documented format with their direct supervisors in FOB for that solo phase. So if problems are identified, they can come back and go, we thought you were ready to fly solo, you're clearly not, you need to go back to training. They can come to the chief and say, Chief, this guy's not gonna cut the mustard, he's gotta go, and he cannot be retained. So there's all kinds of fail-safes throughout that 18-month probationary period. If we have problems here, it's generally gonna come down to someone's just not gonna cut it because we have all these other early interventions. We shouldn't get to this phase and continue to have problems, is kind of the mindset. One of the other questions that was brought up was, what do other agencies do? Again, field training programs are not mandated by the state of Kansas. This is something that each agency has to choose, but on a state level, KHP uses a 3-phase program that's 77 days long, and that was information provided by Lieutenant Welbley I know Sergeant Salamanca spoke with him directly. The evaluations are somewhat similar. Obviously, it's a much more condensed timeframe, 2.5 months as opposed to our 5 to 6 month. And then the FBI uses a new agent development program, 18 months, uses logbook experiences similar to that Reno model with like that narrative format, and training in the core investigative skills. So I believe that is all we have at this point in time.
As a matter of fact, when I spoke to the federal agent of training, it was almost parallel to ours. It was almost just like different words for the same thing. I mean,
Sounded like it.
as we were comparing it, yeah, it was like, it just sounds like ours with a different name, so. Theirs is 2 years, their probationary period is 2 years, is all, it's the only difference.
Do we have any questions, Mike?
Oh, Karen, go ahead.
Again, going up the ladder to the more seasoned officers, I really like the process that you have. I used to use it, I guess, really effectively, which is the self-eval, the logging at first, but then the self-eval when you meet. Do we do self-evals in the annual reviews for the officers?
We do not do self-evals for the annual reviews for the officers, but it's been a part of the command structure evaluations. In other words, since I've been a lieutenant, I have done a self-evaluation of that, and I can tell you without a doubt, it's probably the most difficult piece to do. I don't know if you've ever done a self-evaluation, but it's actually not a very easy thing to do, to evaluate yourself. But so it's not a part of the annual one, and that's an interesting idea for regular officers, but it's been a part of the command structure all the way up
Well,
for a while.
I would throw it out in that for the same thing that they're describing, if in using the same form that your supervisor's using, if you're evaluating yourself, if your it measures both
Sure.
actually effectiveness, and if you don't want to rate yourself, well, it depends on the person. Rate yourself higher than you think your supervisor will, but it provokes the conversation, you know, if it's annotated as well in terms of why I gave myself a 3 or a 2, I thought I needed some improvement, or why I thought I'm a 5, you know, and then
Generally,
like,
that's been my experience, is a lot of times the commander evaluations below me that I've read, they have a tendency to be very critical of themselves in some regards. But it is a piece of the command structure, so that's an interesting
well,
idea.
that's because they'd like to have you score them higher than they did, if possible.
I
It's
suppose.
it's just a great dynamic, and if you're seeing that with your trainees, I would sure encourage it, because it
And it may not be part of our standard evaluation process. I can tell you that getting to where I've been in the command staff for 5 years now, but I always required of my sergeants, you know, we've talked about their goal setting, that they have to have input into their goals, but they also need to be able to articulate their strengths and their weaknesses. And I know I'm not the only one. So I do know that while it's not standard in our evaluation process, the cultures are shifting within law enforcement. You know, and I can tell you that within this agency itself, it's been a massive shift just in my career. And people are growing in those things, and you see that on the individual level even before it becomes mandated, which I think is what puts this department light years ahead of several others, is because there's a lot of people motivated to make it better.
I think it's an important part that they brought up, that slide drove home, that I know the committee's aware of, but I think the public needs to be aware of. I mean, in the state of Kansas, the requirement to be a certified law enforcement officer is the 16-week KLETC.
540 hours.
Ours is 24 weeks now as STPD. So that's one point. But there is no mandate in the state of Kansas to have a field training program. So there's a lot of agencies in the state of Kansas where you go to KLET, you do that 16 weeks, and then you're out on the street and you learn by doing. That's not what goes on here. And it hasn't been that way for a long time. So I think that's an important part. The second point, I know that Councilman Hiller, I know you appreciated that, because as this shows you, there's a multi-layered, multi-level lots of documentation. It's not just the way it's written in the book, but can you do it? And are
Exactly.
you doing it the way that's in the book?
Exactly.
So I knew that there would be an appreciation from you, because you bring that up with almost every topic that we bring before this committee. It's a pretty great example here. And the third point I want to make is, obviously, and they speak for themselves, but we have a training staff that is dedicated and exceptional. And I think they displayed that here. But this is a program that I love to talk about in the public and showcase, because it just stands out for the way we do it and how we move it forward. And we're never satisfied. And you can tell by the personnel here, this is not necessarily a thing that's driven by the chief, but the training staff always looks at what they're doing and how they can do it better and how are other people doing it and does that better. And we are constantly evolving and working and looking how to deal with the modern day employees. And I just think that's probably the most impressive piece of this entire thing. So I want to thank the training staff publicly for all they do for the agency.
And that's at the sergeant level. I'm new. I haven't done anything yet.
She's right about that.
He humbly said, could I?
Who's that?
Very good presentation, Lieutenant. Very good. Sergeant as well. And you kind of hit on it, Chief. It's the quality of people that are involved in this training. And I think that makes a huge difference. And we touched on them, but maybe a little bit more about how does Sylvia Ortiz get selected to be an FTO? What goes into saying, Sylvia, this is an important part of the police department. We want you to be an even higher level participant in making sure that we're doing things right. What goes into picking out your FTOs beyond the supervisor checking on them and things like that? I mean, somebody's got to say, Brian Wheelis, I think we have to talk to him about that. How does that come about?
And I think that I'm going to throw it to Sergeant Salamanca here in a second, because I think he brought up he dropped in a very good point. Was one of the things we had to look at, which seems simple, but it's really not. Not always the best police officers make the best field training officers. And who can teach and who can instruct is a different skill set. And for a lot of years, this agency and other agencies maybe still aren't doing it. But and I don't want to steal his thunder, so I'm going to hand it to him. But the instructor development piece of how we looked at field training officers and how we look at future commanders, and that piece of it, of being able to take what you know and the experience you have and put it into a format where somebody else can, not just I showed you and you saw it and you should have picked it up. So I would throw that question to Sergeant Salamanca, but I thought it was a good point he brought up about how we have changed some of the things that we look for.
Thank you.
So the way that works is that we post the position to all sworn officers, and the officers are selected based on the number of vacancies. And generally, we get more submissions than we do vacancies. So we do our due diligence. We look at past performance evaluations. We look at memos. We look at endorsements from rank and file, line supervisors, commanders. We evaluate what that person brings to the table, what kind of longevity he has, or what he's done in the time he's been in the department, because sometimes being a tenured officer doesn't necessarily mean you've been productive. You just have occupied space. So surprisingly, sometimes we find even the officers with less than 5 years have really made a good reputation for themselves, tactically communicate, de-escalation, unconditional respect. They just have things that we like and admire. And then we collect all that data and we send it up to the chief's office for the final decision. So my previous lieutenant and I worked really well together in that, in facilitating that and contacting other supervisors and really wanting to give the chief's office, who ultimately has a final decision on who's selected, as much education information on that person as well, so we get the person most suited. Another thing we look at too is outside the scope of law enforcement, this person have had experience as a plant manager in the civilian sector, as an instructor, or maybe he did in-service at a previous employer. Maybe he's a veteran who was a firearms instructor in the Marines. Anybody that has that skill set and can command a room and communicate, those are the attributes we look at. And we get all that information, we compile it into a nice organized format, and we send that up through our chain of command, and then the chief makes that decision based on.
Right, and that is a lot of information that comes, and we spend a great deal of time, and I say we because it's the chief's decision, but we talk about it at the senior command level, and we go through that, and we bring a lot of that to the table. And we rely a great deal on the information that is put together on that, but it is very much different things that we're looking at, and I liked a lot of what Sergeant Salamanca said, and I knew I would, that's why I threw it to him, but it is about respect, professionalism, how they write their reports, how they articulate their testimony in court. There's a lot of things. We look at every aspect that you possibly can, and we are blessed as an agency to have more people interested in training, becoming field training officers, than we have spots. So we're able to vet. And we're able to kind of break down where we need to do and figure out. And sometimes the funnel becomes pretty narrow as to how we do it. But like I said, that's one of the things that I get from the training staff is a great deal of information, and we add that. But we look for it differently. It's not just necessarily the most productive officers we have in regards to arrest numbers and things like that. It goes beyond that, and that wasn't always the case. And you know, even some of the informal leaders that we have in the agency, we take a hard look and a deep dive at the way that they lead. Because we do have veteran officers, and I think he spoke to it very eloquently in regards to tenure is not always the answer to everything. And the experience that you've done it for 20 years doesn't mean you've done it right for 20 years or well for 20 years. So I take those decisions very seriously. All the chiefs that I ever worked for before me spent a lot of time doing that. Those are the two things that I've seen chiefs do the most work on, is field training officers and then the hiring books of the new recruits that we bring in. Those are the time you spend a lot of time going through that information, and you rely a great deal on your training and your retention staff to vet it. But we look at a lot more. The best answer I can give you is we look at a lot more categories and areas than just number productivity than we used to.
Yeah. And if I may, I appreciate that, Chief, and I bring it up because I also think that, you know, being selected as a field training officer should be something to be proud of.
I agree.
Celebrated within the agency, you know. Not everybody gets to do it, but I get to do it. So I appreciate the confidence that the chief and the rest of the department is showing by allowing me to do it. The responsibility that I have to do the best I can so we have better and better and better training for our officers. I think, and always have felt this way, that the training is the heart of an agency. That's where you really get a feel for how well they want to serve a community. And so anybody connected with that effort, I think, deserves a good round of applause, quietly if nothing else, because I think they should hold their head up high for what they do to maintain that level of integrity for our agency. So I appreciate everything that you guys do. Thank you, Chief.
Well said.
Karen, you done?
I really appreciate, I know Deputy Mayor Padilla asked to have this on the agenda, and I think it was very good. Because the kinds of things we're tasked with looking for is what really is that caliber? And we've talked before about training is just training, but what'd you get out of it? Is it working? And hopefully lots of people are watching or will watch the replay as well, but that's important. The steps that you've made are really important for the officers and for the community to know that there's a high standard there. You've got more pride and more determination to do a great job if you know that the expectations for you and your colleagues were high.
Yep.
And I just really appreciate that. And then we talked about the ABLE program before, the corresponding development of ABLE, and not just somewhere in some guideline that you got trained on that says you have the right to say something, yet on the other hand, there's a command structure where you don't speak up if it's a superior or maybe even someone at the same level, to build that in to, I mean, really it's teamwork, you could say, but the fact that we've got that as a check and balance for only the reason for quality is important that we've learned as well. So thank you.
I would agree with that. I will tell you that I've multiple times when commander movements happen, they sometimes ask us, well, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? I think the trick is you give your top answer and that's where you don't go. So
what are you waiting for?
So I have said training multiple times, and I couldn't be more excited for this. I've been here 30 days. And what has resonated with me is the advancements of training that maybe the public is not only aware of, but even within our own agency we're not aware of. And I did ask the chief to address our full command staff on August 19th in an effort to educate even our internal people about not only what we're changing, but invite them to observe that. Because what I watched Sergeant Campos and Sergeant Salamanca do last Friday with our recruit class would behoove everyone to see, because the learning style and the instruction style is very different than what I went through 17 years ago as a police officer. And I am headed to Hutch next week to take their instructor development school, and it is coming to our community so that we can train more instructors and more people in it prior to the first of the year. We've already collaborated with KLETC. That was my first visit there, was to ask them to bring it to us, so we don't have to go to Hutch and worry so much about cost and manpower. They're bringing it for free, the 4-day instructor school, to our community for all of those regional academies that are in this part of the state, Lawrence, Johnson County, Kansas City, and us, to send our instructors for that instructor development. Because how we teach is more important. I will tell you, it is more important than what we teach. More important. The quality 100% supersedes the quantity. I can give you 6,000 hours of lecture, and if you still screw it up, it did me no good. If I can train you for an hour and you can apply it, we're winning.
Well, Chief, a couple of things. I appreciate your comments starting from the head and expecting the best.
That's the only way to do it.
And I can appreciate that. For Jennifer, I knew we were gonna get we asked for 100%, and I knew she was coming with 200, because that's what she's always done. She's played the whole dang field on the ball dive. We couldn't get her to stay in her position, so.
I told the chief that. I said, I have a hard time staying in my lane, and you just made my lane a lot bigger.
Yeah, you did. You did.
Congratulations on your new appointment.
So I look for good things to come out of our training, because she's gonna push you. You're gonna push her back. You remember, I said it today, she's gonna push
I
you.
will note it for the record.
Well, if I can interrupt only briefly.
Wait, I'm not done, Karen, just a second,
Okay,
just a
I don't want
second.
you to skip.
Wait a minute, I've got the floor. Salamanca, all the training
Okay.
that I've been with you, and you know, I've been here for a while, I could appreciate that team. I really
Thank you.
can. Because I've watched you over the years, and so I could appreciate that, so.
I appreciate it.
That makes me feel good to hear that we have some checks and balances. It really
Absolutely.
does. It really does. Not just with our recruits, but with each other. And I think that's important, and I think that's some of what our constituents, our citizens are looking for, is that we hold each other accountable. So I can appreciate your years of service as well.
Thank you.
Karen, you may.
What she said, you and Campos.
Oh, I didn't forget him out. You're
Okay,
right.
just making sure.
Even though I'm heartbroken about Robbie, but, you know, I can appreciate you guys. I did meet the recruits, me and Mike, and I have never met. It was awesome, and they're on fire. They're really
They are.
ready to get to work, and I don't know how many we'll get, but they were excited about Topeka, and they were excited about how they were treated here. So I think that said a lot. Only
Great.
thing I was sad, they ate lunch and then they were gonna go run them to death, and I'm like, Jesus. I don't know if that's part of the program, but that, they got it that day. Anything else before we move on? Karen? Nope, okay. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Number 5,
Take care.
yes. TPD Summer Community Outreach Program Report. Who has that?
That's me.
Captain Jana Harden.
Oh, I was wondering why she was sitting back there.
I'm learning stuff. I worked with some very intelligent people. I learned so much from Sergeant Moore and Lieutenant Cross. That was impressive.
So you're gonna be on the training team? Is that what you're gonna do?
I am not.
She's just a role model.
I can't work for Lieutenant Cross.
I couldn't either.
No.
I couldn't either. Thank you. Oh, let's move forward.
Okay, so you guys have me on the program for Community Outreach Program Report. That's what I'm here to do. Ready? Okay, so we had a few summer projects that I think, even though COVID had a significant impact on a lot of things, especially last year, when we wanted to take full advantage of all these things, this year was fantastic. So what you're looking at there, those are pictures of our SRO officers in plain clothes, so you may or may not know which ones they are. and the Boys and Girls Club Topeka. It's the teen center. So, in two more slides, there's a list of everything that they did, but just in these pictures, we captured some of the fishing. They taught them how to do mechanical work on cars, change tires. Oh, by the way, I could have learned some things from this program. I probably should go through next year. Next slide. They did a Habitat for Humanity project, so where they're building, they end up building Adirondack chairs and a picnic table that they're donating to Habitat for Humanity, to one of the new homes that they renovated. They also taught them, I can't see what it's all in the pictures, but you can see Officer Hamilton is in the top left in the black shirt. And he used to be a construction worker and probably still is to some degree on the side. So he taught them all the woodworking they could handle. They went to Restore, where all that machinery is, where he taught them how to cut and build and just life skills that we could all probably benefit from. Next slide. There's the schedule. So it's a 5-week schedule, and it was jam-packed. This Friday, next week is the end of it. So they learned all the things that we have listed there. Yesterday they went to Kansas City. The very last thing was the Negro League Museum and the Kansas Monarchs game, which was yesterday. They spent some time in Topeka doing some historical stuff, the Brown v. Board, the State House tour. They visited K-State, Washburn. They did career days. They learned about city court. They went to the fire station. They did project presentations, so they had to do projects themselves and then present it to the SROs. And obviously Boys and Girls Club staff. They visited, you can see, I don't have to read all of it to you, I suspect, but I'm just really impressed with this program because it's not just us trying to mentor. It's like we are mentors, but we're also teaching. They learned how to do finances, all the things that typically we hope to learn at home, but we don't always. So it's just somebody else adding another layer that happens to be a police officer. So we, get to show that we're human and we have to do all of these things in our own lives, and then we get to impart it on these kids. And it has been a fantastic program. They love it. The Boys and Girls Club love it. And I'm sure we'll repeat it next year. Last thing on that, the etiquette dinner. They're actually doing a manners class and learning etiquette, and they're then going to serve us a dinner with the things that they've learned in that. So we're going from working on cars to etiquette. We've covered all the bases, and I just love this program.
So where do the donuts come in?
Well, I think it was a fun slide, so I put it in there, and I love donuts.
All right.
And I like you don't, everybody loves donuts. Next slide. All right, so this is a basketball camp with, is it Tanaya? I don't want to get it wrong, Tanaya Gibbs. 35 7th and 8th grade kids at Chase Middle School. And the SROs did assist with this as well. Tanaya she brought in some special guests, Crystal Kemp, who is a fantastic basketball player, Annette Wiles, who is probably the best that the state has ever seen and ever will, Jack Alexander, I hate to say, I don't know, and then Mike Longhofer, obviously also local. So she taught a full week of basketball camp, brought in these guest speakers, and then the SROs joined them as well. I can't speak to the SROs' basketball abilities, but I'm sure they learned from Tanaya and the guests. Did you want to add anything to that?
Jack Alexander is our first water commissioner.
So there's Jack
And,
Senior.
yes, it was, and he also played for the Monarchs, or
No, the Ramblers.
The Ramblers, you're right,
Speak
the
high.
Ramblers, the Ramblers. And he spoke on playing with Wilt Chamberlain, and he also, what it was like playing with Wilt Chamberlain. And he just gave just an older perspective that the kids really, really enjoyed. And Crystal Kemp was a Topeka High standout and also went on to play for KU. Mike Longhofer was, and he still is, these were just some of the guests that they had, but Mike Longhofer was a trainer, a professional sports trainer. So he came and talked about taking care of yourself, how to stretch. So they got a lot of one-on-one from different different areas. There was a therapist there that talked about anxiety. So I'll let you continue.
I appreciate that. I like all those details. I just knew that they had a fantastic time, and obviously those are just some of the guest speakers, but really great speakers to bring in and to talk to kids. Next slide. So this is still to come, which is movie night sponsored again by Councilwoman Ortiz, and I'll let you talk on that if you'd like as well.
We've asked Topeka Public Schools and myself will be hosting a free movie night on August the 21st, which is Coco, and our staff will be there. TPD will be there as well to mingle and talk with our families, and also to be there to patrol.
So our,
At Hummer Sports Park, yes, at the soccer field.
right, so our school resource officers as well as our community officers will be there to join you for the movie night. Next slide.
The chief will be there too.
I apologize, Chief. The chief will be there too.
He'll get all teary-eyed.
Mama Gogo.
He's gonna sit in the back. So the community police officers, just a little bit of an update, have started attending specific NIAs again. We went to a different format for a year or two, where well, you're aware, we did the quarterly with all the neighborhoods. We had a lot of feedback that the NIAs really wanted their officer back. So we've gone back to that. So the CPOs, we still only have a few. There's a total of 6, including the sergeants, but they are doing their best to attend every NIA that they can. We started back on June 9th, and up to this point, we've attended 15, which is a pretty good number. They'll continue to attend the NIAs, the neighborhood watch, anything that they can as far as meeting specifics. But again, we still haven't got back to the point that we can do one CPO per neighborhood or per territory like we did in the past, but they will cover all of the NIAs. And our next big event obviously is August 7th, National Night Out, as long as we are able to do that. I think we're at 48 neighborhoods at this point. So that is August 7th, and it'll be an all-day event. The CPOs, SROs, us, everybody will be in attendance for those, and we look forward to that. Next slide. So there's a couple more things I wanted to say about the CPOs. Officer Lister, I assume you guys know who Officer Lister is. He's one of the CPOs. Currently, he also does everything for the police department involving the police athletic league, and he's very busy. He was named the Boys and Girls Club Topeka Volunteer of the Year in 2020. And a few other things that the community police officers work on that we don't talk about all that often, but obviously the Police Athletic League is Officer Lister. Officer Evans works with Florence Crittenden. She just spends her own time working with the girls there. They joined Hy-Vee for ham giveaway last year, and then during COVID, they did a number of drive-by birthday parties. We had just endless requests for drive-by birthday parties since nobody could get together. And then, of course, we did the Special Olympics. They're always very big into helping with the Special Olympics. Sergeant Wilson has been a huge supporter of Special Olympics for some time, and so that was another part of their activities over the year, and every year, actually.
If I may.
Yes, you may.
If I may interrupt, Officer Lister, I know him well. He has worked with myself and State Representative John Alcala to establish that after-school 3 badges boxing program over at Salvation Army. And from the very beginning, we were wondering whether or not we'd have good response. And I know that they have at least 35 kids showing up on every day that they're open. And Representative Alcala is down there with them, as he's got a background in that. And it has really taken off. The kids have really enjoyed it. And what I like is that the adults and some of the parents, they hang around too. They want to see what's going on. And so he puts in a lot of time and effort. And for the officers who also volunteered to be coaches, very appreciative of what they're trying to do for the community.
Thank you. And yeah, that program has taken off. We have a number of officers that volunteer their own time to go box and teach boxing and learn boxing and all the things. It's been a very successful program, and he loves that stuff. Next slide. So also this summer, the chief has implemented Segway Patrol downtown. We basically from 11 to 1, the lunch hour, have a couple of officers on Segways downtown, mostly during the event or over at the events at the Evergy Center. And then, you know, around downtown just to basically do community outreach, be seen, enjoy getting out of the police car, talk to people. So we did that starting in July, the beginning of July, and that will culminate at the end of August. So when you see the Segways downtown, that's what they're doing. They're just out doing some community outreach, getting out of their cars and making some good, positive community contacts. Next slide. And luckily, with COVID briefly going away, we were able to have some special events return. So we were able to do some of the ones I listed, the Juneteenth Parade, Tap That Topeka, the second Saturday concert series, the Country Stampede, and the 4th of July celebrations. I'm sure all of you were at the Country Stampede. It was very huge. It was a huge event, and everybody that's assigned to the Community Outreach Bureau and some patrol officers as well were assigned to that event. And out of that entire thing, I don't know how many thousands of people attended and visited our city. We made one arrest, and that it was, we tried so hard not to do that one. It was such a successful event, and I really think for us, for the city, it was very positive. Upcoming National Night Out, homecoming parades, the St. Patrick's Day Parade, not in March, the Irish Fest, and Touch a Truck. Those are some of the things that are coming up, and hopefully we're able to do all of those. And there are a few others. I just listed a couple. Next. That's all I had.
Okay. That's really the end. Is there anything else? Does anybody want to respond?
Well, I just want to compliment, as usual, the return of the CPO program. It's more than just going to NIA meetings, and the people in the neighborhoods so appreciate having a person who already knows their neighborhood and knows the people there that they can call and kind of vet an issue or report an issue. At the same time, at least right now, I know that you're juggling people's time. And so if there's I've had one or two that we sent into the unit that it got assigned to someone, Officer Lister for one, on one of the cases because that worked best for you. And I think that's working well in terms of phasing back into that whole program. I appreciate how responsive you were, because it turned out it was just, kind of lens from the bottom, lens from the top, or something that you all, some people didn't understand how valuable and important that was to neighborhoods. And so just thank you. And this is all just fun. It's good to see.
Well, I had the easy part today. I had the easy part today.
Well, all the pieces are important, and you've highlighted again what we've heard before in terms of the officers personally being involved in the community as well, and that's not required. Of course, everybody's life is different in the obligations that they have, but it's exciting to hear that they're involved, as of course many other citizens are, and I think that that resonates really well with people. So, thank you.
Yes.
Question for the chief. The Segways. I know that we have struggled in the council with complaints about the bird scooters downtown, and I know that they were going to do some geofencing, hopefully to cut that down. That combined with the Segways presence, has that helped curtail some of the more aggressive users of those scooters?
I guess I would say from my perspective, it has. In other words, the amount of information that was flowing to me on different cases and constituent concerns through the council and through the city manager's office and other places has cut down considerably from my perspective. So I think the holistic approach that we've used, not only what Bird Scooter was doing, but even the public attention that it got from the city council and all of the efforts that the various council members did to try to come up with ideas, but also all of the police presence downtown. And beyond, I know you've all heard me talk about this before, beyond the segue downtown being community outreach too, we had some issues in parking garages and different things of a more traditional crime reduction strategy that we needed to do too. So there is no community policing without crime reduction without community policing, as you've heard me say many times. So when we're doing those visibility patrols and interacting with the community, we're also doing crime reduction strategies at the same time. So my perspective on the bird scooters is I have not had any number of complaints, and certainly not looking for either, but that would be my perspective. Hopefully that's what the council has enjoyed too. But I believe that it was I think the community did what we needed them to do, what we always ask them to do, is bring forth concerns, bring forth problems. Let us work through with the business partners and the government leadership and law enforcement when we need to, and try to solve the problem. And I believe, at least my perspective, is we've cut it down significantly.
Thank you, Chief. That's all.
Thank you. I was down at Evergy one night, I think it was Thursday late, and I thought they were bird scooters, but they were citizens bringing their own scooters.
Oh, really?
That's what I learned after talking to one of them. And so I think we're getting a lot of that too, because they were all over the place.
And that
Yeah,
would
and
explain why
obviously
they were there.
geofencing and things wouldn't impact it if it wasn't a
Right,
bird
right,
scooter,
because
so.
I seen some scooters come and then they kind of like die off. And then these others are like in full speed. So I asked one of the people that was riding, he's like, no, these are our family scooters. We've had these. This is a great place to really just ride all over. So I think we ought to keep that in mind as well.
Well, we're certainly trying to address the community outreach efforts and the crime reduction efforts
Right.
and the quality of life issues as well.
Right. I just want to personally thank our officers and our chief for letting us get in the community, our officers get in the community, whether it's Boys and Girls Club, whatever they're doing, that is a very vital part of breaking down that barrier. And I appreciate all the things that they attended and the things that they've done for some of our kids and all of our kids, because I think it's very crucial that these kids know see a different side of you. I can't speak enough on the SROs that were at the camp that participated. And I think our kids had a good time with that as well, that they were able to talk to them and relate to them. I too have heard a lot about people just really, really being so excited about our community officers back. And so it makes a difference.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I mean, we clearly get into this line of work to be servants of the public, and that's just another aspect of it. I mean, we have, you heard me say many times, we have a lot of great people at the police department, and there's a lot of board services, board of director services for charitable organizations, church organizations, sports organizations, and we went through that big list at the very beginning of the committee. So,
Right.
we live in this community. We raise our families in this community, and so we're as vested as you can be, and it's just a great opportunity to get that information out there at all levels.
Yep, I agree. You got anything, Deputy Mayor?
I'm good, thank you.
You good? Karen, you good? This meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you all, appreciate it.
Thank you.
I did email you all that, but.
And what page are we looking for, did you say?
You said 18.
18.